So I've got a couple more questions. Can we, does anyone have any questions? Is it okay if I do you want to speak into the mic or yell out or? Oh yeah, can you speak into the mic?
Is it on? One thing I haven't heard yet in the multi-cloud discussion is interoperability and cloud portability. So if you think about moving workloads between clouds to enable a true utility compute model, can you speak to how do you move a workload from, say, one private cloud infrastructure to a public cloud infrastructure, maybe pull it back, or move between two different public cloud environments? What are the barriers for interoperability?
A lot of that has to do with the maturity and architecture of the application itself. I'll give you some examples of what it was like to be moving a lot from Amazon to zCloud. It's the same, really. I think most applications can be done in this way. It is certainly nothing like drag and drop, but that's the vision. But you have to think about data gravity is probably the biggest obstacle to overcome. And again, this is disproportionately about applications that were real time, could not go down, that made money, and when they were down, people are screaming at me. So the basic process is you have to get your data in both places, wherever it is now and then the new future home, or if you want it to be in both, you need to be getting it to that second place. The next piece is you need to be able to abstract and ideally have an automated way to cut over and to cut back if there's a failure. You need to have the same mechanics, ideally, for the day-to-day operators of the game who need to affect change. So if there's a failed server, you don't want them to have to know, oh, well, it's in this cloud, so I do it this way. If it's in this cloud, I have to read a manual. You want to abstract those differences into something like a multi-cloud orchestration platform so that you have the same interface, it's drop-downs, it's parameterized, you're giving them the capability to use tools in a consistent way regardless of where it is. But once you have that data in both places and you can affect a cutover, then you have the ability to kind of pivot. But again, as IT and operations people, we're all in a heavily audited and change management oriented environment. So you're not going to be just doing this willy-nilly. Most of the application migration projects I've seen take a number of weeks, right? If you can truly get to multi-cloud, your software architecture really doesn't care about differences in performance and can self-heal and replace failed components. Think of the Netflix being a great model citizen of cloud utopian, cloud native types of architectures. If you can truly get it there, then you're federated and you should be able to affect a lot of change more autonomously, but that takes years.
Yeah, so we get this question a lot, and I think our early innovation in the space was the server template construct, and Zynga used it to some extent, where you separate the base operating system from the application or the persona of the server that's running. You keep the data, to your point, in the locations it needs to reside in, but it's kind of a separation of concerns environment. So you can launch on Azure or Windows OS, you can launch it on Amazon. Once it's launched, it becomes the same exactly configured SQL Server, for example, and it attaches to the data, and all that's abstracted away from the application. The code runs, it doesn't even know the difference. And so what happens is you have a spectrum here. One is, and there's a couple companies that I think started up around the concept of, let me take this VM and transform it into an AMI and run it on Amazon. And I think there's in my opinion, there's a small subset, 10% or less, of the applications that exist in the enterprise that will fit that profile. So there's a need for tools, from the simplest app that you can VM bit-level copy to another infrastructure, to the most complex back-end system that's tied into all your ERP components and your invoicing that might take years to really re-architect to a point where you could get portability. And the main business driver there is going to be DR, for example. There's very few reasons to move some of those apps from a business model perspective. If you don't want to run a data center, go to Equinix, right? I mean, there's some easier answers than re-architecting the whole thing over the next 3 years. One thing I would mention that we've seen a lot of recently is containers. So Docker, they did their conference last week. There's a huge amount of interest in what that provides. We're big believers in what it can do. From my standpoint, it's just making something we solved for 5 years ago much easier And the less we have to do with that, the more we can worry about core business issues, the better. So it's watch that space, but also beware if someone says they have a magic wand, because I've not seen one.
Yeah, I agree with you on the Magic Wand. I mean, the Magic Wand's great for kind of monolithic single node or single server applications. Sure, they are quite portable because they don't depend on that, the rest of the set of servers moving along with them. That's where iterations around testing and making sure that you've instrumented all of that automation again and understand the performance differences between two different infrastructures. But yeah, I agree. Lift and shift is of limited applicability if you have large applications.
I think the only comment that I would throw in is, and you can tell who the network guy is, right, is that you also have to, there's everything that's been talked about at the workload management and the application and data layer, and then you have to give consideration because it is cloud, and just by default, network is involved, is moving between these clouds, both on a one-time basis and an ongoing basis. I mean, the ultimate dream here is being able to load balance evenly between, or shift seamlessly between any set of cloud providers. That's a dream that's far away. And again, shameless self-plug here. About a few weeks ago, you probably saw we announced a new product line, which is indicative of the future of our company, called the Cloud Exchange. And it's the next generation of switch inside the data center that allows for a consumer or an enterprise to actually do multi-cloud management at the network layer, being able to move data between multiple cloud providers on a single switch without having to have private connections or actually having to use the internet to do that. And it actually is, it's a game changer, but again, like I said, network engineering is not very sexy, so it's actually at a very, very low level, but it actually has a very, very fundamental impact to the utilization of multi-cloud and to your question of how do you move things back and forth across different platforms.
Yeah, thank you for the question.